Europe's not a supermarket. Emmanuel Macron's words sounding like a man in charge as he chastises East European leaders that flout common rules on refugees and freedom of expressions. At his first EU summit as French president, it's too soon to say whether the 39-year-old newcomer is the man in charge on the continental stage, but he's certainly the man in charge at home, cementing his presidential election win last month with a landslide victory in legislative elections. Add to it Wednesday's cabinet reshuffle that's clipped the wings of his centrist coalition partners from the Modem party as their leaders face a corruption scandal. Now, there's Macron's star power, and there's also France's star power. It's standing with Germany and the other big Eurozone nations ahead of a Brexit that is sure to alter the balance of power among the remaining 27. France, a nation that's banked a lot on an EU that is more integrated, but after Brexit and a French presidential election that saw the far right qualify for the second round, that integration also has to address the imbalances that have turned so many voters against Europe. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Macron's marching orders. And with us, she's an En Marche campaigner. Hannah Starman focuses on European affairs. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
From Brussels, Sophie Rouser, policy advisor to the EU Parliament's European United Left Bloc and who was a candidate for the Unbowed France party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
From Warsaw, political scientist Marcin Zaborowski, senior associate at the international affairs journal Visegrad Insight. Thanks for being with us.
Hello.
And Stéphane Kodiak, senior economist at Euler Hermes, who follows all things French for that company. Thank you for joining us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Today, we're really getting down to the concrete. Those were the words that President Macron used as he arrived in Brussels for that first EU summit. That was preceded back in Paris by that first cabinet meeting since his post-election reshuffle. And there was also a big interview that was published with 8 European newspapers. Solange Mougin has more on that.
It's here in the Élysée Gardens that President Emmanuel Macron sat down for an hour and a half with 8 European newspapers to unveil his foreign policies. On his strong pro-Europe stance, Macron said joint collaboration with Germany is essential, a promise highlighted by the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Macron warned EU countries that respecting the bloc's values is a must.
Europe isn't a supermarket. Europe is a common destiny. It is weakened when it accepts its principles being rejected.
Belgium's Le Soir focused on the U.S. Macron said he hopes Donald Trump will return to the Paris Climate Accord. He said France and the U.S. are strong allies, but that Trump's foreign policies were, quote, unpredictable and a source of discomfort for the world. The centrist president also said his vision on Syria is slightly different from that of his predecessor and former boss, François Hollande.
I haven't said the deposing of Bashar al-Assad is a prerequisite for everything, because no one has introduced me to his legitimate successor.
Macron said ending the war in Syria will take more than just a military solution, but that France would be ready to act alone militarily if Bashar al-Assad crossed Macron's red lines.
I have red lines on chemical weapons and humanitarian corridors. I said it very clearly to Vladimir Putin. I will be uncompromising on that. So the use of chemical weapons will be met with a response, even if France acts alone.
In regard to Vladimir Putin, the French president said they have had constructive, respectful talks, but that they still have real disagreements, especially in regard to Ukraine.
All right, let me begin with you, Marcin Zaborowski, because we saw that final point there about how to handle Syria, how to handle the questions of terror. That is what's on the official agenda for this European Council summit. And Macron promised at that summit, hailing the fact that there's been an agreement on more integrated European defense, something that he says he's going to bring up in a Franco-German cabinet meeting next month. Do you feel as though this really is a change?
Well, I certainly think that the election in France and the very strong mandate that Macron has received with his very pro-European agenda, at the time when populists are rising everywhere in the Anglo-Saxon world, it does actually change the balance in favor of running away with of moving forward with European integration. And I think that there is a momentum now, which probably won't last very long, but I think the momentum exists for France and Germany to move forward and to come up with a new initiative that others will have no choice but either to join or to be left out. And obviously nobody wants to be left out.
A new initiative. What's the new initiative about for you?
Well, I would imagine, we do have very obvious foreign policy challenges. Syria was already mentioned here. The relationship with the United States, which is rejecting climate change agreement, is becoming more complicated. Russia remains very belligerent, and at the same time, the EU does have very weak foreign policy. So we need initiative which would strengthen EU hand in foreign policy, and we need initiatives that would strengthen the EU defense arm, which is practically non-existent. And that really needs to change, because we no longer can rely on American leadership in the West, really.
Sophie Rauger, you agree that the EU's foreign policy has to have more teeth in it?
Well, I mean, on defense issue, what we've seen so far is a total absence of sovereignty of the member state. What they want to do with this EU defense plan is more synergy with the NATO, a NATO that is, a tool from the past. I mean, there can be no EU foreign policy if it is to be submitted to the NATO one.
Hannah Starman, you agree that the EU's plans to ramp up defense, more defense spending, is all in conjunction with NATO, and it's all subordinate to NATO's will?
No, I don't agree, because I think that NATO is not the same NATO anymore once the United States withdraw from a lot of its commitments. That's the first thing. So we're talking about European defense, about a European defense project that has been on the table for a long time, except that it's the first time that we really have the means to do it, that we really have this strong German-French partnership that can pull it off, and that so far has not been possible.
Reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. This one from political scientist Alexei Klebnikov saying this Macron's position may lay the path towards closer Russia-France cooperation on fighting terrorists in Syria. He takes the lead in the EU. Is this the way you see it?
I think that the President of the Republic will not take the lead alone. He will work together with all those who are willing to work with him. And it would seem to me that a lot of European leaders are willing to work with him. And he is open to any cooperation that is constructive. He's a pragmatic president. He has shown to be pragmatic until now, and I think that he will look for solutions and not for dogmatic responses that we've known for the longest time.
All right, so there's the issue of defense, but there's also the issue to do with whether or not the EU becomes, more open to free trade, or perhaps has more checks and balances when it comes to free trade. Macron, at his very first press conference at the EU summit, saying he feels as though he's managed to sway some opinions when it comes most notably to the issue of posted workers. That is to say, people who are employed in an EU state while being paid much lower wages from their home countries. Macron, in that interview that we mentioned at the outset with those European media, spoke of imbalances. Here's what he had to say. Let's not get this wrong. The great defenders of this ultra-economically liberal and unbalanced Europe, the UK, came crashing down on this. What did Brexit play on? On workers from Eastern Europe who came to take British jobs. The defenders of the European Union lost because the British lower middle classes said stop. Extremes feed off imbalances like this. What's your reaction when you read that, Stéphane Colliac?
My reaction is that in the world economy, you have many protectionism. So in the EU we are for free trade, but we have to defend our positions, and we cannot ignore that during the 3 last years, there was 2,300 protectionist measures in the world, not in the EU, because we are free trade by our treaties. But we have to defend our position and to gain some reciprocity from our partners.
Protectionism works on two levels. There's protectionism between the EU as a bloc and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But then there's protectionism within the EU. And this issue of posted workers is key. Macron has vowed to fight on this. What's your religion on that? This idea that there is something wrong with allowing posted workers to do similar jobs for less money when they come to places like France?
The reality is that there are different positions in the European Union and different development levels in the European Union. Wages are not the same in the countries of the zone, and we have the Eurozone for the first part, and for the second part we have other members of the European Union, but not in the Eurozone, and there are some differences between them, and these differences can go to policies not very supportive of the integration of the European Union. Some governments are not pro-European in the East. So the governments in the West, in the Euro area, have to respond to these non-cooperative policies.
Sophie Rauser, are you encouraged? After all, the fight against posted workers was something that Jean-Luc Mélenchon was in favor of. Would you say that Macron and Mélenchon agree on this?
What we can agree with is the previous statement that social dumping is precisely what is destroying the European project. Now, we have seen, I don't know if you've seen, but I have seen the document that was leaked out of the conclusion of this European summit. And actually, the posted directive has been postponed to autumn, to a next European summit, precisely because Macron didn't manage to find a solution with the countries from the East. So, I mean, in terms of like first action, concrete action, this is a failure. So there's another thing, because if you want really to fight, to put an end to social dumping, well, you need to change the rules. And the rules, according to the current treaties, are saying that income harmonization is impossible amongst other problematic issues that are inside these European treaties.
Marcin Zaborowski, with so many workers from your country, Poland, who come to work in Western Europe, do you sense a growing rift? Is Emmanuel Macron feeding a rift that's growing between East and West inside the EU?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think that there are some fair observations here that were already made that. There is an issue of social dumping, which can, appear as part of the unwelcome impact of the effect of the free movement of labor, and it can get out of hand. What happened in the UK, to which after enlargement happened in 2004. Where the UK was essentially flooded by close to 1 million of, my beloved compatriots, but did have some, I think, very negative impact on the perception of the European Union in the UK, and did feed into the essentially Brexit. So one has to approach these issues with some sensitivity, and they should be, the free movement of labor is a sacrosanct of the EU, but it's understandable that that some jobs need protection against social dumping.
Sophie Rauser was saying that it's not going to be in the final. It's not going to be in the final communique. Does he have enough momentum to change that?
Well, I mean, the point is that EU is obviously very divided over this issue. For Poles, Czechs, Baltic states, and so and the others, they want to keep unrestricted access to to postal and any other work, and Macron will want to put some limitations. I understand. I don't think they will come to an agreement on that. It will be very difficult because the interests are very different, and there is also the issue of how you present this to your domestic electorate. The Prime Minister of Poland would need to say that I kept this freedom of labor unrestricted for my beloved compatriots so that they can work freely in France for more money, and Macron would need to say exactly the opposite. So on this issue, I don't expect that an agreement would be found. But I would not get tied up with the this is an important issue, but there are bigger issues than that.
Bigger issues than that. Just one reaction on the hashtag F24 debate. I think Macron's being really cheeky and clever, whilst everyone is, foreigners. He's talent grabbing. I guess that's an allusion, Hannah Starman, to that offer he made to scientists to come and work here. But in the case here of posted workers, he's pretty blunt in that respect. You just heard what Marcin said, that there isn't going to be a compromise possible. Someone's going to lose on this one. And B, that there are other bigger issues. You agree?
I don't agree that compromise isn't possible. It's true that the two positions are very divergent, but I also believe that compromise is always possible. And I think that everything that we've been told was not possible has been done so far. And I trust that President Macron will find a way to find a solution together with his European partners, of course. As to talent grabbing, I think that's an excellent initiative. It was an excellent response to President Trump's decision to leave
the Paris Climate Change
Paris
Accord.
Climate Change Agreement.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. Well, we're talking about the momentum of a new French president, Emmanuel Macron, who's come to his first European Council summit, armed with a brand new landslide majority in the French Parliament. We're talking about it and how he can convert that in the company of here our panel. Here in the studio, we're talking with Hannah Starman, En Marche campaigner who focuses on European affairs from Brussels, Sophie Rauser, policy advisor to the EU Parliament's European United Left Bloc, and is with Jean-Luc Mélenchon's France Insoumise, our unbowed France, if you will. Marcin Zaborowski, political scientist, senior associate at the international affairs journal Visegrad Insight. Welcome back from Warsaw. And Stéphane Kolyak, senior economist at Euler Hermes here in Paris. We were talking about redressing imbalances and how the momentum for this new leadership has to heed the calls of the rise of populist parties all over. Now, as European leaders were heading to Brussels for this summit, just note that the Czech Prime Minister was hosting his Austrian and Slovakian counterparts in Brno this Thursday. Their Slovak PM, Robert Fico, suggested that common policy on migration be meted out to smaller subsets of nations, that it not be the affair of the 27, that these are decisions that can't be made by the 27. Marcin Zaborowski, when you see the strong remarks by Emmanuel Macron, when he talks about how the EU can't be a supermarket, it seems as though the Slovak leader is suggesting the exact opposite there.
Well, everybody has to play to domestic electorate. Everybody has to convince. Really, the leaders are really speaking to voters back at home rather than thinking about the international stage. The Slovak public opinion is very hostile against the acceptance of refugees. especially when it's done in the system of compulsory quotas. This is something which stirs up Slovak, and not only Slovak but also Czech, Hungarian, Polish, and the other public opinion here in this part of Europe, which has so few refugees that this is very this is basically a fear of unknown. What Fico is saying, he knows that it will win him votes and support at home. What Macron is saying that these Europeans need to show more solidarity is also winning him support at home. But I think compromise on this particular issue is actually quite possible. Everybody is doing a little bit of posturing right now, but I think the system of compulsory quotas for allocation of refugees, that has not worked out. But at the same time, everybody in Eastern Europe also needs to realize that if they want to speak about solidarity and keep receiving funds from the EU, they also need to show some solidarity.
Yeah, because these compulsory quotas, France itself has not met them yet, Hannah Starman. So on that score, or the number already is quite small, and the French haven't yet met those. So what's going to be the compromise that can come forward, as if you agree with Marcin that there is a compromise possible on this issue of welcoming refugees?
Well, before I answer your question, I would like to say something else. President Macron said several times during his campaign that the first thing that will need to be done will be to restore confidence in France as well. France has not always respected its obligations, so the first thing to do is to restore credibility, to do the necessary reforms, to be a credible partner. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, of course, there will be a solution. There will have to be a solution because European Council is composed of representatives of the European governments. So the Council conclusions are a result of a common work. So when the countries have pledged to do things, they will have to do it. And I think that President Macron will be very firm on the fact that the
right. So
European states will have to
how does he handle the leaders of
fulfill...
Hungary, Poland, Slovakia? What does he do?
Well, they will have to comply with their obligations. They will have to show solidarity. As he said, Europe is not a shopping mall. Europe is a common destiny, and they will probably also have to be reminded of the fact, beyond speaking to their audiences, which I understand, they will also have to be reminded that they themselves were refugees in the late 80s, in the early 90s, but also before, in 56 for Hungary, in the 60s for Poland and Czechoslovakia, and it's time for everybody to remember why the European Union exists and to go back maybe to the roots and to the history, which will help, I think, us in this in finding the common ground and the common solutions for the problems.
Sophie Rauser, how should Emmanuel Macron handle countries like Hungary and Poland when they say they don't want to take refugees in?
Also, to answer just the previous question, but it's connected. I mean, the quota issue is not on the table anymore. It's not in the conclusion of the councils anymore. What they do agree on in terms of migration policy, what they do agree on with Poland, with Hungary, states that are having their own little domestic problems in terms of state of right and democracy. Well, they do agree on the fact that you need to do more return and readmission agreement, that you need to do more free trade agreements with Africa and other countries. I mean, we need, on this question, we need to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that the migration challenge is here to stay. And the more you do migration, the more you do free trade agreements, well, the more economic migrant you will get. And this is the very problematic, essential problem we are getting with this kind of compromise.
Stéphane Kolyak, you agree?
Not completely. It's true that in the more open world you can move more, but it's not as simple as it was said. We cannot identify a relationship.
If you destroy local economies, necessarily you get more economic migrant. And
Yes.
the more you arm EU borders, the more you will have death in the Mediterranean Sea. What actually the EU policy is about right now is arming Frontex to build a fortress Europe.
if you destroy it, I agree, but I disagree that free trade is destroying the African economies. It's not as simple as you say, I guess. I think that it can be some problems with free trade for different economies with different level of development. It's true, but a free trade agreement is not exactly free trade. You can have exceptions for sectors vulnerable to the free trade during periods. So it's not free trade exactly.
All right, but Sophie Rouser, just getting back to what you said earlier, what is the message that the President of France, that the Chancellor of Germany should be sending to countries like Hungary and Poland and Slovakia?
Solidarity, of course. A message of solidarity. What is the European project about, if not burden sharing? I mean, it's not possible that we leave a current situation like in Italy or Greece and then try not to talk about the debt relief and keep the migrant there so that we can pressure structural reforms in those countries.
But it's falling on deaf ears, so what next?
What is your question precisely?
The question precisely is how does the President of France, how does the Chancellor of Germany handle countries like Hungary and Slovakia and Poland that say, no, we're not going to respect quotas, we're not going to take in more refugees? They flat out just saying no.
By taking their own share. By respecting their commitment first. As you said earlier, France is not respecting this for the moment. And I think sending more help to countries like Greece and Italy would be a good start. For example, the revision of the Dublin rule would be a very good start as well.
Revisions of the rules when it comes to the process of where you enter the European Union when you're a refugee, when you're a migrant. I just want to move on before we continue, just because the clock is ticking, and just talk about the balance of power more broadly within the European Union. Right now, you've got Brexit talks that have just started this week. Once Britain leaves the EU, what place will a French president have? How will it be different from what it is right now?
Well, I think the place of the French president has already been restored, independently of what happens with the UK, because France was missing from Europe. And I think that the United Kingdom has always played a little bit apart, which means that Germany couldn't play alone. Now France is back, as it's been said before, and I think that the balance of power has been restored on the continent. This leaves the European Union with a much better bargaining power now in the Brexit negotiations, which is not the case for the United Kingdom after the elections. So I think that the European Union has every possibility now to negotiate a good agreement for the European Union, but also to offer the United Kingdom cooperation in areas that are of particular importance, such as defense, such as fight against terrorism, such as exchange of intelligence, which is what the president also pointed out in the interview that he gave to the 8 media that you mentioned before.
All right. How far the new mood, both in the UK and on the continent, drive a change in policy when it comes to Brexit? That's a question that has, well, the European Council's president quoting John Lennon.
Some of my British friends have even asked me whether Brexit could be reversed and whether I could imagine an outcome where the UK stays part of the EU. I told them that, in fact, the European Union was built on dreams that seemed impossible to achieve. So, who knows? You may say, I am a dreamer, but I am not the only one. Thank you.
Marcin Zaborowski, what's your reaction? Is Donald Tusk perhaps overplaying his hand there when he hints half-jokingly that perhaps the Brits now may want to go back on Brexit?
I don't think it's going to happen in the immediate future. But I mean, it's politically good move on the side of President of the EU Council, Donald Tusk, to keep the door open, to say that that this process could be reversed. I think it's very.
Isn't it a little too smug, though? Doesn't it? I don't know, a little bit humiliate those he's negotiating with?
Well, no. I mean, the point is basically to say that, look, I mean, it's never good for organization like the EU to see one of its core members leaving. It doesn't send a very good message about the European Union. It does, as you hinted at the beginning, it does actually provide some imbalances within the EU. For example, the camp of the more liberal-minded, member states is fundamentally weakened by that development. And another development which might follow would be a stronger integration around the Eurozone member states, which is leaving non-Euro zone member states in a difficulty. So there are some very undesirable consequences of Brexit. And I think that Tusk very rightly is hoping that at some point in the future, UK would come back and, to its right place at the heart of Europe.
Sophie Rauser, you agree?
For sure, there will be several layers of integration to the core of the European project. So in a way or another, UK will stay part of this idea. We already know this. It's going to be called something like third state agreement. And as the previous speaker said, like on the matters like defense issues, there will be some reinforced cooperation. What matters more, and what I'm personally concerned with, is the future of Europe. What Europe are we fighting for? And for this, what we have seen from Macron kneeling down to the policy of Merkel, I'm very concerned with, because this project is the one of austerity, cuts, deregulation, more free trade, precisely what European people have been rejected in the, let's say, past 10 years at least. So this is what we need now. We need a European recovery, social, greener democracy and transparency in this European project. This is what we need.
Stéphane Tolliac, do you agree that there has to be a little bit more recovery? And I mean, we had that big infrastructure project that was touted last year. It turned out not to be that big in the end.
Sorry?
This big infrastructure spending project that was touted by the European Commission a year ago, and it turned out to, well, not be that big in the end and not play that much of a factor. What's your response when you're Sophie Rauser saying that not enough is being done to spur growth?
Yes, as always, when you announce a big infrastructure plan, there's some spending already planned in the past, so it can be a discrepancy.
Looks good on paper.
Yeah, and it's true that we need more public investments. Particularly in France, it was in the program of Macron before the election. We will see if he implements it after. But we need more investments, more public investment, also more corporate investments. We have an investment lag in France, and it explains why our growth potential is lower now than before.
Yeah, because they've just revised upwards the figures. I think it's like 1.6% growth for France.
Yes.
I heard on the radio, it sounded like it was some major victory, but it's 1.6%. It's not much, is it?
It's the INSEE figure. So
the National Statistics Body.
Yeah. We have a 1.5 forecast. It's an acceleration from last year. It was 1.1. The thing is that France is converging to German growth. And it's a positive aspect. If you have too many differences in growth between the two main countries in Europe, you cannot have the couple, the two countries able to negotiate more European integration, because you have too many differences between the two.
So this could make it a fertile ground for a negotiation on that point. Hannah Starman. How much of a belt-tightener will or free trader will Emmanuel Macron be now that he's got his big majority? When you listen to Sophie Rauser saying, he's not showing the ambition needed when it comes to spurring growth.
Well, I disagree with Sophie Rauser to the extent that I don't think that the president is going to kneel down before anyone, including the German chancellor, but he certainly will work with her in a constructive way, and I do think that he will do what he promised to do, which is to do the necessary reforms in France to make France a credible partner to Germany in order to be able to do what needs to be done. He also said that the treaties will have to be revised, that things will have to be done. Things will have to be done that Germany is maybe not extremely enthusiastic about doing at the moment, but each partner will have to make a step towards the other in order to make it work. But I don't think that this is going to be a relationship of subordination.
Marcin Zaborowski, a change in the dynamic between Paris and Berlin. How will that impact the rest of Europe? How's the rest of Europe feeling about it?
Well, it's essential. I mean, it's for the European Union to function, to prosper, to go forward. You need the Franco-German engine. They need to get on, and when they get on, then things get done in the EU. So I think this is good news that we have in Paris the president who is pro-European, that we will have very soon the election in Germany, which will be probably won by Angela Merkel. If they are not won by Angela Merkel, it will be won by the Social Democrats. So both options are pro-European, and we have potentially a very positive momentum for the European Union. However, I think it's important that France, pays more attention towards Central and Eastern Europe. In the past, France, left this area, to be basically accommodated by predominantly German business interests. And I think some kind of, rebalancing is here needed. So I think it's not enough to tell off, Central Europeans that, don't treat us like a supermarket, accept more refugees, be more pro-European, do this and that. I mean, he may be very correct in that, but I think it's very important that the sensitivities that exist here are being taken into consideration. Otherwise, you're leaving the field to the others.
All right, don't lecture. Also engage with the others. Marcin Zaborowski, thank you for joining us from Warsaw. I want to thank Sophie Rauser in Brussels, Hannah Starman here in Paris, as well as Stéphane Colliac. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. Say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. So a lot of reaction and analysis regarding the debate topic today online. Just a couple of articles that I picked out for you. The Financial Times, Macron wins EU fans for Hollande's unpopular Eurozone idea. Now, what this is essentially saying is the rollout of, I suppose, greater integration in the Eurozone, a finance minister, an Eurozone parliament, and a shared budget. François Hollande came up with that idea, or at least he was one of the people who came up with that idea. It was massively poo-pooed at the time. Angela Merkel wasn't even such a fan of it. And, well, the Macron magic, or perhaps it's a question of timing, it means that everything is a little bit different now. It's gaining a warmer reception, as the Financial Times says. The single currency is just one area where France is making a renewed push for EU reforms and finding it is not being rebuffed. French swagger is back, says a senior EU diplomat. So that's one take on things in the Financial Times. And I suppose just a quick connected, I suppose, theme. This is an article that was published yesterday in The Australian. Established political parties struck on the fast track to oblivion. So we're really in a very different era to the time when François Hollande as the leader of one of the two major parties in France, was pushing for this European reform. In the French domestic political landscape, you've had the complete blitzing of the mainstream parties. Emmanuel Macron, with his sort of, I suppose, halo, has arrived, and certain ideas seem a little bit more popular right now. And of course, Brexit has played into all of this as well. Britain would have often put the brakes on those plans to further integrate Europe and the Eurozone in particular. And as Politico says here, Macron does not want the European Commission, which negotiates on behalf of member countries, to go easy on Britain. Instead, he sees Brexit as a grand opportunity to leverage Franco-German influence on the global stage. So in other words, what's bad for Britain in Brexit is good for the Franco-German engine, and to drive integration and press ahead with reforms that Britain would normally have opposed from inside the EU tent. So I guess that's also what's changed in terms of Macron putting these ideas forward, and they're getting a better reception than Hollande.
All right, definitely a change in dynamics. Stéphane Kodiak, Politico.eu also talking about Pierre Moscovici, the former French finance minister, who's now a European commissioner, for being the first ever finance minister for the EU. What do you think of that concept?
The concept can be constructive and interesting, because we have the same currency area, so why don't have a common finance minister?
All right, why not have a common finance minister? Certainly, it's all about momentum, James.
That's right, and I'll just finish with one image, because I think in quite a few he had the EU emblem behind him, and it struck me that it looked somewhat like a halo, and I had seen it in headlines elsewhere as well. So perhaps it's the Brussels equivalent of the Queen's hat. I'm just putting that out there. Maybe it's a little bit stretched.
Yes, that hat. We talked about it yesterday. Yes. I promise we'll talk about it again tomorrow in the world this week.
Right, the EU hat on the Brexit head of state's head. Anyway.
All right. Many thanks, James Green. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.